Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, a few of you have asked me to do a video on reclaiming your power after suffering from abuse. I guess we'll see how I get through this video. You never know. I never know, because it's one of those things, being in touch with your feelings, it happens. So, if I burst into tears, yeah, I'm okay. I'm fine at this point as far as my recovery is concerned. It's just that when I talk about the subject, I often put myself back in that place. So I've been thinking about this and trying to figure out what are some of the things that we need to know um, about the subject. First, it's awfully common. It's annoyingly common. It's horrifically common. The last statistics I saw is basically 1 in 4 people by the age of 12 have been molested by a trusted adult, which can mean a family member, a relative, or someone who is an adult in the community that people trust. And often people don't listen to the child, which is unfortunate, sad, annoying, infuriating. They don't pay attention. For some reason, a children's perception of reality is almost always questioned because as children we've got vivid imaginations, some of us. Supposedly we can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. You know, like me seeing fairies and angels and spirits and whatnot. Which of course I know is real, but not everyone knows that. But so there's a lot of things that happen to us in the process of doing this, but I was thinking about what is it about us that makes these people do such horrible, vile things. I was thinking about it as a power situation, obviously, not a sexual one, because really, when it comes to sexual assault and sexual violence, it has nothing to do with attraction. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're wearing or whether you're cute or not cute or whether you talk to someone or not. It's about gaining power over a person. And this happens to boys as well as girls, so I don't want to miss that piece of it, because I think it's probably as common as it is for girls. Sometimes the statistics say it's a little bit less, but I think that's because until recently, boys have a tendency to not talk as freely about what happened to them, and so it skews the statistics. But basically, 1 in 4 people, and you think about that, that's 25% of the population that has been abused as a child, not counting the assaults after you get older and leave home and all this other stuff that happens along the way. This is just basically up to the age of 12. And so that is a huge segment of our population that has been abused. I think that there's fewer abusers than there are victims, because abusers have a tendency to be prolific. I mean, when you look at some of the statistics, some child molesters have abused up to 100 or more children before they get caught. So it's a lot easier for them to abuse multiple, especially if they're one of those trusted adults in a position of power, like of course the Catholic priests, who were quite prolific with their spreading of their illness, or the Boy Scout leaders and Girl Scout leaders and teachers and coaches and doctors, and it's like it crosses all lines. It's not about wealth and status, because there's just as many people being abused that are raised in a wealthy family, and just as many abusers of people of wealth as there are of anyone else. Who knows, maybe more, but as far as the abuser part goes, since it is about power, that's kind of like the core, sort of the kernel of why. But I think that there's more even than that. It's definitely about power. It's also trying to destroy us. Uh, Most of the people that abuse others are sociopaths in one form or another. Some of them have different kinds of mental illness, but a majority of them are sociopaths, which means that they really don't have feelings the way everyone else does. And I think that they see someone who is sensitive and open and trusting, and they want to kill it. They want to kill that off. They want to destroy that because they can't experience that. They can't have that. Um, it's it's like our existence somehow makes them more aware of what they lack. I don't know. It's just guessing on my part, obviously, and everyone's situation is going to be a little bit different. But my father, he was into older children. He was into teenage girls. So I didn't get molested by him until I was older, because then that switch in his head or whatever flipped on, I guess. And my uncle was into children, and he was a non-discriminant child molester. He didn't care if it was a boy or a girl. I think one of the reasons boys have a harder time coming forth in the past is because of the stigma at the time of being considered gay, and if they were molested by a man and they were a boy, does this mean they're gay? And of course it has nothing to do with that either, because it's about their innocence. That's what the pedophile is attracted to, is the purity and the innocence and the trust. And so, although I think understanding that is helpful to a certain extent, I mean, we want to know why, what are the motives of these horrific humans? They're not human, in my opinion. My definition of humanity does not include these people. Uh, and, and if you're watching this and you're one of them, then that's just too bad. You can have all the rationalizations you want, but it doesn't change my opinion. But in order to reclaim our power, we need to know what was taken from us, which is what got me into that line of thinking in the first place. And one of the things that happens, of course, is your ability to trust your own instincts. Because generally speaking, if you're a child and this is happening, the person that is doing it to you doesn't start off with that. I mean, it's not like a full-on assault. It's a whole grooming process of making you like them and trust them and giving you presents and situations and so forth, creating situations. Generally speaking, that type of pedophile is well liked by the family. They're the ones that will take care of the kids for the busy parents. In fact, there's a whole group of pedophiles that actually marry single women who have children so that they can have easy access to potential victims, and be the helpmate and the caretaker and all this other stuff. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of times children aren't believed, because when it gets to that point where things are wrong and the child knows something is wrong, they may not understand exactly what is wrong, but they know that something is wrong. And then when you try to tell an adult, if it's the kind of individual who is helpful to the family, they don't want to believe it. They don't want to consider the possibility and so forth. And another sad fact is that a lot of times in these situations, if it's like the man of the house, let's say, the person who lives in the house and is the sexual partner of the mother, and the child discloses this, then the mother will often blame the child and say that she tempted him, asked for it, it's somehow her fault, and then the child ends up having to leave the home, which is completely and totally unfair and doesn't make any sense, except for the idea of not wanting to face reality. And I think that a lot of people have that as an issue. If it's an uncomfortable reality, they don't want to deal with it. And I'd say this is probably about the most uncomfortable reality there is. So like my personal experiences, um, we were moving from off-base housing to on-base housing. Probably I was in grade school. I'm not sure, third or fourth grade, maybe something around there. And the moving man came over, and he was helping to move all of our stuff. And he exposed himself to me, and I was surprised and sort of curious, and didn't know what that thing was. And he took advantage of that and wanted to know if I'd like to touch it. And then he wanted to know if I'd like to kiss it, which I did not like the idea of at all. And then I ran and basically attached myself to my mother's leg and hid behind her body for the rest of the day. And then I didn't tell her about that for years. Of course, I'd already been molested by my uncle, and, tortured and abused by my father, both psychological and physical torture. A lot of fear and anxiety in my home environment. Abject terror, actually. I think I cried myself to sleep every night when I was a kid, up until I was full in the teenage years. I was probably still doing that for a while, even after that. But because I just felt like, why is this happening to me? What have I done wrong? Why does the universe hate me so much that it would do this to me? And to be clear, it's not your fault. You have nothing to do with the reason why. You could have been any child, any situation. They're the predator, and they're the ones that are after you. You didn't choose the life. You didn't choose to be abused. I hate that kind of thinking that is out there, where every situation you have is an opportunity to learn. Well, yeah, every situation is an opportunity to learn, and it's a good idea to learn whatever it is the lesson is trying to teach you. But that doesn't mean that you knew going in that this was going to happen to you. It's not the way it is. It's sort of re-victimizing the victim, and I'm against that completely. So you will not get that attitude from me, and if I ever express that, tell me, because that's not what I'm into. Sometimes words are weird and they come out different than you expect, or they're heard different than people have different experiences with language and make them hear something that I might not have meant. So the years went by after I was molested by the moving man, and I started, getting older. We moved to Virginia. I think we had actually left my father at this point. So it was, a safer environment when it comes to that. But I had started learning about sex and desire and so forth, and then I understood what it was that the moving man had wanted. And I felt guilty because I had been curious. And that's a normal thing. Children are curious about their environment. They don't have a judgment to, right off the bat about whether something is good or bad. It's just different. And I finally couldn't take it anymore. It was like ripping me inside. It was like this guilt thing was just tearing me apart. And I finally told my mother what had happened. And my mother's response was less than ideal. She said, "Why didn't you tell me about that at the time? Because we could have stopped him from molesting other little girls." So now the onus was on me. All the children that this man had molested since he'd done his thing to me were now my responsibility and my fault. Totally not fair. And missing the point. And I thought about it over the years, because that was a rather huge, duh, what, kind of thing that happened in my life. And I realized that I told about my uncle. I immediately told about my uncle. I only waited until we got back to from New Jersey to Rhode Island. But I told, and I was the oldest grandchild, and nothing happened to my uncle. And we continued to see him every holiday, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, when the whole family would get together, at least one of those holidays every year, sometimes more than one. and and he was always there. So why would I think that saying anything about a stranger was going to have a different response? I didn't understand that people are protective of their family even when they're doing horrific things, where they won't protect a stranger. So I worked through that, and I have to say, rather disappointed in my mother's response. There was a lot of things about how she responded that were somewhat disappointing, to say the least. But, that's something that if you're in a situation like that and you have family members, you're going to face that kind of stupidity. Um, and it's just like, you have to stand up for yourself. You get better at it. I mean, at that point, when that happened, I was still in high school, so I had no clue what to do with that piece of information except be hurt and shocked, and feel responsible for all these children for a period of time, like I'd done something really bad. And um, and yeah, life is not cooperative when it comes to going along the way you think it ought to, the reasonable method, because there's so many people on the planet that are not together. They're not reasonable. They're not honest or ethical or moral or whatever. And I love when I see a news program, they're talking about this guy, murdered all these people or molested all these people, and their church goes, but he was a good Christian man. He wouldn't have done any of that. So it has nothing to do with your religion or your spiritual practices, because there's plenty of abusers, not just in Christianity, obviously, but in any religion out there, including New Age paths and stuff like that. It's like they are opportunistic. If they can figure out a way to manipulate you one way or another, they will use it. My first husband was a sociopath, and he was really good at that kind of thing, looking for what he could see as my weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses was that I had this desire to be perfect, because I incorrectly assumed that if somehow I was perfect, everything else would work out. That was one of my strategies, the survival strategy or coping mechanisms or what have you. And so, defined negative emotions. This you might run across in any number of fields. So it was a negative emotion included anger, jealousy. Well, those were the two main ones he used to manipulate me, because I didn't like either one of them. But the idea that you need to become enlightened, and to be enlightened, you need to be able to not respond in these ways to situations, which of course led to him having sex with a woman in the bed with me, and then being disappointed in my response while I was pregnant. Yeah, that one in particular. So there was a lot of that emotional manipulation and stuff that went on, and he really thought he was quite brilliant, and he did. He was intelligent as far as it went, but he was the best liar I've ever met in my life. He could pretend to be sorry about something, and people would believe him, whether he was telling. He never told the truth, and he never was sorry for anything he did. So obviously, when he apologized, it was a blatant lie. So because of him, I sort of try to pay attention to how people talk and what they say and so forth, as a way to judge whether or not they're safe for me to be around, and have identified a couple of sociopaths in my life that way. I'm not always on top of it. We're all human. I'm not perfect, and I know that. I make mistakes. But my philosophy with all of this is first figure out what it is I can learn from the situations that I've gone through and survived, and then apply to the future so that I can hopefully avoid them again. But one of the things that is there's so many damaging things when that has happened to you, and losing your innocence, that's the thing that they like to take away. And innocence, the kind of innocence that you have when before you're abused, you can never quite get back. I mean, that is gone, but you can get close to it. You can get back into that frame of mind where you're seeing things as if for the first time, and are able to be filled with wonder and joy at existence, which is the other thing they don't want you to have. So you can reclaim that part. And then being able to trust yourself and others is huge. That is one of the biggest things, because what the heck, you know, you were wrong about this person, and then you got in another relationship and were wrong about that person, and you have no way to discern or decide who's safe or who's not safe. And I certainly went through that. And I think in my case, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but in my case, since it was my father was one of the main abusers, because he abused me my entire life and terrorized me. I never knew what was going to happen in the middle of the night. I never slept through the night. I thought he was going to kill my brother one day when he was beating him for 8 hours without stopping. I remember that incident rather clearly because my mother was there, and we were crying and holding on to the chair legs in the living room listening to him beat my brother, and my brother refused to cry because that was his attempt to keep his power. I learned very early that crying made it go faster. And so, yeah, I could cry on a dime because I knew what was going to happen if I didn't cry. So that was one of my strategies. But since he was my father, you have this internalized thing. Your mother, your father, your parents are supposed to be the people that love you. They're the ones who are supposed to care for you no matter what. The face only a mother could love. Family's thick. Blood is thicker than water. Blah blah blah. And you kind of internalize that. And when you're a child, you're totally dependent upon these people for your safety, for your housing, for your food, for your entertainment, for your education. You don't have any real power of your own when it comes to being a child. It's like that's what we are. We're dependent on the adults around us. And the ones that are supposed to protect and care for you turn out to be the ones who are abusing you, whether it's a mother or a father. I've known some men who've been severely abused by their mothers, which is just as damaging. You have this inside part of you. You have your internal mother or father has now been contaminated by the real mother and father, and you're I know for myself that when I finally woke up to what was happening, the men I was attracted to were like my father, incapable of love. My father, whatever his mental illness was, whatever was going on with him, his desire to be in control and be in charge and have the power over everybody else and so forth that he exhibited, he was not capable of love, because love requires trust and giving and caring more about someone else than you care about yourself, but not to the point where you destroy yourself. So watch out for that one. But considering other people and considering how they feel about things is part of love, as well as the trust. So since I never had that from him, I never was loved by my father, I kept finding men who were not capable of loving me, and then proceeded to try and convince them that I was worthy of love. I was trying to repair that damaged part, that hole in me before I understood what it was. And I think that happens to a lot of us. We tend to be attracted to the wrong people until we become whole ourselves, annoying as it is to have to work on yourself all the time. But it's true. You can't see another person if you're projecting onto them what you think you need, even if you don't know that's what you're doing. It's like it can be so unconscious when it comes to that. So look to the relationships that you're in and look to the dynamics of those relationships. Are you having to fight all the time with this person because they don't respect you? Are you crying all the time because they're hurting your feelings and they're being mean to you? You know, look for those factors. Are they manipulative? Do they undermine your self-confidence? My father did a good job at undermining my mother's self-confidence. She was a very good singer and pianist and wanted to be a nurse, and he made sure that she couldn't do any of those things. That was undermining her desire to become something more than just a housewife. Of course, remember I was born in 1950, so there are different social dynamics back then, and nobody would interfere with the family because it was family business and it was nobody else's business, and so nobody else outside of the family knew what was going on and wasn't supposed to. And my father's belief was he was the king of the castle, literally speaking, and he could just make life and death decisions about us, and that was that. So, um, so yeah, my first marriage, like I said, was to a sociopath. Turns out he was also a serial rapist, and he taught me a lot about how they think. According to him, at any rate, anytime we get fooled, it's our own fault because we're stupid, and we should have known better. So there's a lot of con men that are sociopaths. They're not all, serial killers and serial rapists and so forth, or cult leaders, because there's a wide range of intelligence and social strata stuff that happens when you're born, where you're born, and who you're around, and so forth, that can influence your ability to uh, control things better. But, yeah. So, some of the weird things that happened to me when I was with my first husband was like, okay, I was pregnant when he started raping women. And I was pregnant when he was arrested, and I had a 2-month-old when he went to prison. So my son was born in the middle of all of that stuff. And yeah, he certainly tried to manipulate me when he was arrested and so forth, giving me hints about what I should say and that kind of thing. But I was going somewhere with that. My brain got off on another track. Okay. So after he was arrested and he got out on bail and he was back in the house, one day he decided to tell me everything he'd ever done. Up until then, I wasn't sure. Up until then, I wanted to believe him. Who wants to believe that they're married to a serial rapist? Um, and it started in the morning, and I found out he had been a peeping Tom since we met. Found out about some attempted rapes he had done that had failed, and how stupid he thought these women were, that, he looked like he had a gun, and yet one of the girls ran out in the hall to get help, and he thought that was really stupid of her, because if he'd had a real gun, he could have just killed her on the spot. While he's allocuting everything, I have a voice in my head, thank goodness for my voice, which has saved my ass more than once, this being one of them. And the voice popped in my head and said, "This man is completely and totally insane. You don't know what he might do. Keep your mouth shut and don't say a word, and you will get out of this alive. So I didn't speak the entire time. And he took me to the scene of the crime, where he'd raped the girl he was on trial for, told me how he felt and what he was thinking, how disappointed he was that she had not fought back because he wanted to have a reason to kill her because he was getting bored with the whole idea of rape. It wasn't stimulating enough. It's probably about the strangest day I think I've ever had. And he, I believe fairly strongly, was looking for a reason to kill me at that point. If I had done what they do in the movies, I'm going to go to the cops and tell them everything you said. I'm going to talk about you to the wrong people. That could have given him a reason to kill me on the spot. But he didn't, and I'm still here. So yay me, and yay my voice. I have that thing that like just came through at the right time. And yeah, so these people can be extremely dangerous, and it's a miracle I got through that day to speak of at all about anything. So, you know, some people aren't as lucky or don't have as much extra assistance or know that they have it. I don't know, but it's not, doesn't mean that there's something better about me or that I'm great or anything like that. It's just that was what happened, and I'm really glad it did. So it gave me an opportunity. My second husband also was not capable of love. Um, he was controlling, very much so, in the household. He would make edicts before he left for work in the morning about things that needed to happen while he wasn't there that he would check as soon as he came home. I fought all the time with him. I was constantly fighting with him because I was trying to stand up for myself. The thing is if you're living with someone that you have to stand up for yourself all the time, it's not a good relationship. And that was the time I ended up feeling I needed to go have an abortion because he was abusing both of my children. He put my son's head through the wall more than once. He punched holes in the wall all the time. So there was a lot of violence, which was my childhood, all the time. So I was used to it. And that's the other thing is that we don't think of it so much when we're in it because it's something that we're used to. And being able to see from afar, in our mind at least, and to evaluate it and realize this isn't how things are supposed to be and we don't have to stay in them, is definitely an important step. So I determined I wasn't going to give him another child to abuse, and then he managed to get me pregnant. Weird circumstances that happened with the doctor who was supposed to do the sterilization procedure, who took out my IUD and then waited 6 months. Even though we were using protection, it failed. And yeah, so, and around this time of year actually was when I got pregnant. It was around January, I think, and I ended up having the abortion in March, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was March that I ended up going in for the procedure and being sterilized at the time, which now I find out is something a lot of women don't have the ability to do even now. So how I managed that, I don't know. Again, extra help somehow. But yeah, it was like he remarried. When we divorced, that's when I realized I didn't have to listen to him anymore. He called me up on the phone and was yelling at me about what a terrible mother I was and what I wasn't doing right and all this other stuff. And it suddenly dawned on me, he's like, wait a minute, there's no reason why I have to listen to this jerk anymore. And I hung up the phone. That was very empowering. Hanging up the phone and saying, I don't have to listen to you. But yeah, that was before all the magical stuff that I did. I mean, I've always been a witch, but I didn't have a goal of fixing myself in mind. I was just doing what came naturally and so forth. So anyway, that was a big lesson. That also was a lesson in taking control of the situation. I was doing tarot. I'd been doing tarot since I was in high school. And I was doing tarot when I was with Rick. And he, I told him I wanted to leave him. I wanted a divorce. And he wanted to know why. And I told him the reason is because I can't handle you abusing the children. He said, that's not a good enough reason. And I was like, I have to have a good enough reason to get a divorce? I said, well, what is a good enough reason? He says, well, only if you've had an affair. And I thought, okay, there you go. So I did. I'd never done anything like that before. I'm a very faithful person. I immediately went out and had an affair and came back and says, okay, I've had an affair. Can I get a divorce now? I'm very practical. Gotta watch out what you tell me. You never know where I'm going to take it. And so I got away from him. And then I moved. I was in Saskatchewan when we got a divorce, and I was seeing David. That was actually at the time when I started to try and explore my own abilities, and saw the ad for the psychic workshop, which I was so excited about. And David was a Jungian psychologist who was working on his PhD, and he was living with a woman who was a channeler, which he was very excited about. And then he got me to start channeling. He kind of arranged the situation during a past life regression where it happened spontaneously, and then I was off. So that was in a relationship with a guy who was a psychologist and met me when I was broken. And again, not a healthy relationship, in my opinion. He has a different opinion, I guess, the way he writes about me, but I don't know. But he was attracted to me because he saw my potential and wanted to be there to see it unfold and this spiritual awakening and all this other stuff. And also, I became his PhD in spirit channeling and whatnot. And I definitely learned a lot when I was going through that. That experience actually helped me in ways that's difficult to explain. Because when I channeled Moira, her energy is so far removed from our ordinary everyday life that it gave me overview and remembering my past lives, more of them. I already had remembered several of them when I was little. I was born remembering a few of them. But yeah, it's like being able to see things a little bit removed from the reality of what I was in and what I'd gone through, knowing I had even worse things happen before. And by the way, if I haven't said this already, I don't think I did, this is not a competition. I have survived some horrific stuff. This is true. But it's not a matter of how much you've suffered and how much you've gone through that determines whether or not you might want to avail yourselves of techniques to help yourself get better. It's not a competition. Any amount of abuse is too much. And it's damaging to the human psyche, especially to us empaths, because we feel everything. So the channeling definitely was important. It definitely helped with the overview and to feel something other than all the stuff that I had experienced from people. Because Moira's presence is just, she's so totally accepting. I mean, there's like no judgment, criticism, or anything, just a complete loving acceptance that comes with her. And the fact that I chose to be a conscious channel meant I got to experience that along with the other people that were there, and in a more intimate manner than anyone else who was there, obviously, because she was in my body. And so that was very healing that happened, and David helped to bring that out. Unfortunately, he also was very much into it and started, he transcribed every single session we had, tape recorded it and transcribed it later, and we had quite a few of them. We were doing it several times a week, sometimes more. in the beginning especially. And it helped a lot of other people. I mean, her presence was definitely a gift, and it helped other people besides me. But it didn't help me in my relationship with David because I felt like an experiment. And it's not a fun relationship when you are the subject of the other person's research paper. It crosses a lot of lines. And he was the person that said that he liked me better when I cried than when I laughed because he felt that my tears were more genuine. And I never forgot that because that was extremely hurtful and telling. That told me later, when I was able to look back and think about things more clearly, that he wanted me broken because then he was in charge of fixing me and he could mold me and shape me into whatever it was he thought would be a better version of me. He was very much into meditation and so forth. But he is the one who gave me the book The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. He saw it in a bookstore and he brought it home and gave it to me, which was a huge moment in my recovery. Because reading that book, I discovered that there were other people like me and I wasn't alone. Up until then, I did not know that there were other people who were empaths and saw spirits, and except for, stories about seances and that kind of thing. And it gave me a structure, something I could follow. So, yeah, this is going to be a long one. You can take a break if you want and come back to it later. But, so Starhawk's book gave me format to follow to actually start the process of going into my unconscious and figuring stuff out. I had realized I didn't like who I was when I was with Rick. That was the moment I had that particular epiphany, and I didn't like what I was doing to my own children, and everything was wrong. I was falling into these weird patterns and stuff. And so I started working on the exercises that she had in her book. One of them was the cup transformation exercise, which I thought was really important when I read it. I thought, this is something, because this is a way of acknowledging how I feel about stuff. So I'm not trying to deny how I feel. I was also in therapy at the time that I was going through this. I had a counselor that I saw like weekly, I think, which I totally recommend too. But this is a way of acknowledging the feelings that you have so that you're not denying them, and then allowing them an opportunity to come out and for you to feel them, because if they're not felt, they don't go away. And one of the things that I was told when I went into the Incest Survivors group was that those feelings are buried alive. And that's something that's very frustrating for survivors and victims and survivors. It's that you have all these things, they're like still affecting you, they're still there. And if you start to feel them, then everything sort of falls apart. I mean, yeah, it can be excruciating going through that part of the process, for sure. But this was preparing my unconscious in a way. It's like, I think that magic and ritual is the missing component to recovering from serious abuse. The other stuff works and does really well, and a lot of people can continue and function and so forth. But with this, I felt like I had some control over actually healing myself. So that's one of the reasons why I shared that. Is one of the first videos I did was the cup transformation ritual. And and you can make it whatever you want. It's not like it's a one size fits all. It's like it fits any size at all. It's like all sizes at once. It's whatever. Anyway, so I started doing a serious ritual and started tuning into the goddess energy, and connecting with the goddess for me was really important because At that point, I was dealing with my uncle, with the therapist, but I knew that my father was kind of like the core thing, and and you know, he was so obviously a sadist and a bad person as far as his actions were concerned. Um, that was sort of easy to see. And so, but because of that, I felt I couldn't connect to any male energy at all. So gods were out for sure. And having a female centric practice with a female goddess energy definitely was very helpful. I also did start getting in contact with or connection to positive male sensuality instead of aggressive, abusive sexuality, and you know, not lust, but just like enjoyment kind of thing. So I started working on that stuff, and it laid the groundwork for the rest of my recovery. I know. So when I left the Kispiox and went back down to Santa Cruz, or went to Santa Cruz, I'd never been there before except passing. Um, and I moved to Santa Cruz. That's when I ended up in the incest survivors group and in the self-defense class. And I know that it takes a lot of courage to face these things because it scared me to death. I was absolutely terrified to take a self-defense class because I knew that somehow it would change me. So fear of change is a big thing that holds us back. But I also knew that even though it would change me and I would never be able to change back, that I had to do it because I'd just been assaulted by the guy who I went down to Santa Cruz with in front of my children. And that was a big motivation to heal and to show my daughter and my son that I would do something about what happened and not be like my mother. And yeah, so that's one of the things is that when you start a process and you're trying to heal from all this stuff, you don't know exactly how it's going to shape out, what you're going to face, how you're going to change. Which is what I like about magic because it gave me some control over how I was going to change in the essence of me, finding out my true nature. Just when I got in touch with that picture of myself that I've shown you guys from time to time. I was this marvelous, impish, delighted, joyful being when I came into this world. And then it tried to destroy me, and I wouldn't let it. So I've refused to allow that to happen. I got it back. But it's a lot of work. So my mother actually came back into the scenario during that time and talked about it on one of the live shows where she actually heard me when she got me my teddy bear and sent me my panda bear Amanda that Christmas, which was good because at that point when I was in the ancestral survivors group, I realized how mad I was at her for not protecting me. And that's the thing is like people are have to have failed you in order for this to happen. There's no way to go to around that. Unless you were kidnapped, you know, and taken hostage or or what have you. If it happened when you were a kid, somebody, some adult has failed you. Um, so figuring out how to deal with that uh, and accept how I felt and realize that my mother did not have the same definition of love that I do. That was quite a shock to realize that, you know, she believes she loves me and in her way she does, but not in the way I would consider love. And so learning how to accept these things from family who've been involved in the process. But first I had to clear the air. I had to talk to her about um, her failure to protect me as a child, which caused a huge rift in my family. Um, the One of the exercises in the incest survivors group was writing a letter to my father and what he did to me and some of the things that I remembered that he did and how I felt, which was a very difficult letter to write, but very cathartic. And then the therapist asked if when I read it out loud to the group, if I wanted him to hear that letter. And I said, yes. She says, well, send it to him and send a letter on top of it saying you're sending a copy of it to everyone else in the family. I thought, well, why shouldn't I? That's why I sent a copy of that letter to everyone else in the family. Oh boy, I kicked over hornets' nests from here to the end of time, I swear. People were very upset about that letter. And my father read the letter and said, well, I guess if you need someone to blame about all the terrible things that have happened to your life, I guess I'm it. Never acknowledged he did anything at all. But I needed that. And getting to the point where you realize that your needs matter, even maybe more than some other people's needs, especially those who have failed you. My mother and I talk now, not a problem. We've talked for years. But it took about 4 or 5 years after that letter before she finally sort of got it. What I needed from her was pretty simple. I told her over and over again, I just need you to acknowledge that you didn't protect me, and you should have, because you were my mother. Instead, I got lists of reasons why she couldn't protect me. It was because, there were no women's shelters, there was nowhere to go, she was afraid of him, blah, blah, blah. I says, yeah, I know all that, I was there. But the reason we have women's shelters now is because some women figured it out and did it and protected their children. Some women stood up and figured it out. And when I needed a women's shelter, it was there because of those women. You could have been one of them, but you weren't. So, figuring out how to accept these people for where they're at, and if they're really super toxic and they continue to jabber, jabber, jabber in your ear. I did have to protect myself from my mother after Ian and I got together. She came for a visit that first year, 91. And she brought a picture of her sister, who was married to my uncle, who molested me. And so I'm looking through these pictures, and she's talking, jabbering in my ear about my other sister who was molested by my uncle, and how she'd forgiven him and all this other crap. And how, she was so obviously worried about me. The subtext was pretty loud, that I was filled with rage and hate, and I was harming myself and all this other stuff. And while she's doing this talking and I'm looking through the picture, here comes a picture of my uncle. I'm in absolute shock. I have destroyed every picture of my uncle that I had. Ritually, I did a lot of burning of his effigy and, and putting him in the fire and making him go away. Did a lot of child comfort things, working with my inner child, recommendations for rituals you can do, all that stuff. Dream work, tons of it. And then there's this. So I have cleared out a lot of stuff, and I'm now in touch with my feelings. And my mother is just continuing to jabber, 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 and I go over to the sink and I'm like, maybe I can do some dishes and not flip out. And there's these feelings, they're like coming up like this, they're climbing up my gut and up into my throat, and I realize I can't swallow my feelings anymore. Literally, I'm trying to swallow these feelings, and they won't go down because I've done too much work to feel them and to be with myself and be where I'm at. And I turned around and looked at my mother. I said, Mother, shut up. She was quite shocked and astonished. And I said, okay, here's the deal. You can talk about my sister all you want, but no more about how great she's doing as far as forgiving Uncle Bob. I don't want to hear that mentioned again. Anything else that's going on in her life is on the table, and that's fine. And I never want to see a picture of Uncle Bob ever again. Do you understand me? He went, uh-huh. And then I went in my bedroom and cried for an hour. I had to get it out. And Ian came in. We'd only been together for a couple of months when this happened. I mean, talk about uh, a test to see who he really was. That was pretty much it right there. I was just like, wow, that's amazing. So, yeah. So it doesn't mean, even if you think they understand what is going on, having boundaries is really important. And I was very proud of myself that I told her to shut the hell up and stated the facts as like, this is what I need and this is what you will do or else. It was like there's no room for discussion here. This is it. And so, yeah. So we went along with that. And the next time after we moved over here that she came here to visit, it's like I realized I can't trust my mother to have my back. She really doesn't get it. Um, so she came out here and she had visited Aunt Sally or Aunt Nancy again, her sister, and so she hands me another pile of photos, and I said, "Is there a picture of Uncle Bob in here?" She said, "No." I said, "Good." She says, "Yeah, I saw him. He's dying from emphysema. He's in an oxygen tent." And I said, "Good. If anyone ever deserved a slow and lingering death, it's him." So she very expressively rolled her eyes and sighed. Because she doesn't understand that getting in touch with your anger doesn't necessarily mean that you're filled with hate. I'm not like, this was a terrible thing. It never should have happened. It makes me mad. I'm not going to forgive the person who did it. I decided that's what some people do. My sister did that. She forgave him. It's like I always hear forgive and forget. It's kind of like the connotation that I get from the word forgive. And I decided that forgiveness is not my job. Again, that's victimizing the victim, making it our responsibility to fix all these stupid people who don't know what the hell they're doing or know what they're doing and don't care. It isn't our job. It's not our responsibility. We do not have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's not your job to make them understand either. You can try if you want to, but know that it may or may not work. I mean, people have to decide that they're going to actually see what's really going on in front of their own faces. And if they're in denial for whatever reason, it's a pretty strong place for them to be. So if you think that doing magic and being a witch or a pagan or whatever is going to make people around you treat you better, the answer is they will, because you won't let them be around you as much, because you will have better boundaries. You will decide what is and what is not safe for you and who you can and can't trust. Ian is the first man I've ever known that I feel I can completely trust. In the beginning, I wasn't sure because, look at my record, right? I actually had one more bad relationship before I met him, and another potentially bad relationship with the same kind of personality that I rejected before we got together. So I was like completely free, and so was he. And so we, started off the right way as far as that went. Because when David got together with me, he was still with the other woman. And it's like, well, yeah, that kind of dooms a relationship. If somebody is cheating on the way in with the person that they're going to stay with, then you can pretty much guarantee that something bad is going to happen in the future, because they've shown who they are. Not an honest individual, not an ethical person. But yeah, so I mean, Ian and I had to get used to the idea that things weren't chaotic all the time, since I was used to that up until then. I mean, there was always some kind of emotional happening that I had to like deal with. The person left just before I met Ian was bipolar and threatened to commit suicide a couple times, and was very much like control freak as far as like being in charge of the energy and the feelings of everybody who was there and that kind of stuff. So same old, same old. Thought I'd learn better, but it's a long process. So yeah, the first 5 years with Ian was getting used to the idea that conflict wasn't something that happened all the time, and realizing I was addicted to adrenaline. Because when you grow up in the environment like I grew up in, um, I mean, I never slept through the night because I was too afraid of what might happen. And a lot of times things happened in the middle of the night. So I was always on in flight mode. I didn't have much fight in me, although I did do that a couple of times, which was rather surprising to my father. I actually fought him off, or tried to fight him off, one night. But it's like, it doesn't matter that I wasn't taking drugs. I was making it. I was making adrenaline on a regular basis, and when I stopped, everything was sort of dull. Seemed kind of dull. It's like, well, nothing's going on, like, even when I was in recovery, going through therapy, I began to notice that I had that tendency to not pay attention to people unless they were yelling. And someone would ask me a question and I'd hear it, and I'd go like, well, that doesn't really require a response, does it? Well, no, then I guess I won't. And that's part of that. I was starting to come off of it at that point. So learning how to be happy and enjoy it is in itself a chore. Something that you have to allow to happen. It's not easy. I don't think I have any more lozenges over here. Should have brought some in. So, it's different. It's like not what you're used to. And on the 5th year, I freaked out for a brief period of time because I'd never been in a relationship longer than 5 years. And so, like, I suddenly hit this, like, okay, 5 years. Something bad's going to happen now. I never made it past this. He's having an affair. I know it. No, he's always with me. How can he have an affair? Back and forth in my brain. I finally just told him, I said, okay, here's what's going on. This is what's happening in my head. And I know you're not doing anything, but I just want you to be aware. And we're good like that. We tell each other that kind of stuff all the time, which is weird for my granddaughter. She's just like, she's not used to it. It's like, no, it's helpful information. It's okay. You're okay to be whatever you are, but you're also taking personal responsibility for your own stuff. That is the biggest key. No one can do it but you, annoying as it is. And unfair as it is, because really it's not fair. Like when I had to get a restraining order against this guy, I was really mad. He assaulted me and I had to get a restraining order and I had to like do all this stuff. It's like, I'm the victim here, what the heck? But yeah, so so if you're going to reclaim your power, you need to first know what you lost and then figure out how to get what you lost back, or something equivalent, something that works for you. And know that things are always in flux. Nothing stays the same. And pay attention to what people tell you and how they tell you who they are. Pay attention to the relationships that you're in and whether they're healthy ones or not. Because no matter how much you might be afraid to be alone, it's worse to stay with someone who's the wrong person. It's much better to be by yourself and to be alone and get to know who you are, and then maybe you'll find someone who's actually compatible and who will treat you the way you deserve, and vice versa. So I'm hoping that this actually covered the subject, although I think I need to do a follow-up video on just the specific rituals that I used. But I needed to cover this kind of stuff first. Because everyone's going to have a slightly different way of going about it. So I'll probably do a follow-up on this. I think that's a good idea. And then we can talk about more stuff. So whoever you are, whatever has happened to you, it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility to fix the people who did this to you. It's not your responsibility to forgive them so that they feel better about themselves. That's their job. So don't do the stuff that's not yours to deal with. Deal with your own stuff, and know that there's a huge universe out there, and there's some wondrous and amazing things to experience. And the healthier you are, emotionally and mentally and physically, the better able you will be to find and enjoy the things that are there that make life amazing. So it looks like our storm wind has just about arrived, so it's a good time for me to wrap this up anyway. So this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.